You have undertaken to cheat me. I won't sue you, for the law is too slow. I'll ruin you. Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Oh, hi! Mr. Lahasky here. And today, we shift our attention back to the North, where a second wave of the Industrial Revolution was causing sweeping changes to the landscape and the skyline. Between 1860 and 1900, America grew into the leading industrial power of the world, passing Britain, France, and Germany. America's industrial focus shifted from textiles and furniture in the early 1800s to steel, machinery, and transportation as the century came to a close. This newer, heavier industry opened new doors and new horizons. It created unfathomable wealth, but it also created unfathomable poverty, and it changed the nature of work and labor forever. Today, we'll focus on the causes of this industrial age. But first, a big question. Is rapid technological advancement good for society? It's difficult to overstate the importance of technology in our daily lives. In particular, digital technology has caused fundamental societal changes in recent decades. Tech has changed the way we shop, the way we go to school, and the way we interact with one another. And that's not even taking into account the economic impact. As of January 2021, the 5 most valuable corporations in the United States are all technology companies. Technology has been the main driver of the American stock market in recent years, and the market has experienced record growth during that time. But are the consequences of this rapid technological growth universally positive? Many historians have drawn comparisons between the current trends of the digital age and the rapid technological and economic growth of the Industrial Revolution. During the late 1800s, technological advancements caused fundamental changes in labor, commerce, and everyday American life. The emerging steel, oil, and railroad industries drove the American economy to new heights and rendered the United States a true global economic power. But in 1873, author Mark Twain coined this period the Gilded Age. It was shiny and impressive to the unknowing onlooker, but problematic beneath the surface. What might the history of the Gilded Age tell us about what our own future holds? Let's take a look. The Gilded Age was brought on by a myriad of factors, and today's big ideas will outline the most significant of its causes. Here's the first. The Gilded Age was kickstarted by the steel industry, and America's access to natural resources and technological advances allowed for rapid economic growth. So the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s really begins with steel, and the United States was perfectly positioned to produce it in mass quantities. The main requirement for steel production is iron ore, of which America had plenty in the Great Lakes region. Also required was large amounts of coal, which could be mined in Appalachia and in the Midwest. The United States also had access to oil, timber, lead, and copper, all valuable resources for heavy industry. Without question, America's vast land area and seemingly endless resources gave it a huge leg up as industrialization accelerated. But resources alone would not a revolution make. Only after technological advancements could the industrial age materialize. A new method for steel production, known as the Bessemer process, emerged in the 1850s to get things going. The Bessemer process rendered mass steel production profitable for the first time, and it created ripple effects through the entire American economy. The first major application of mass-produced steel was in the railroad industry, which transformed American commerce. More than 170,000 miles of track was laid between 1871 and 1900. Railroads connected distant markets for the first time, allowing for business to be conducted over much larger distances than ever before. Suddenly, businesses had access to buyers throughout the country, and American consumers gained new access to products. The railroad's sweeping effect on American commerce mirrors the way that Amazon has changed the way people shop by connecting buyers and sellers in new ways. Steel also found new applications in construction. The strong compound was necessary to support the weight of tall new buildings called skyscrapers, which became increasingly common near the end of the 1800s. Skyscrapers added value to urban land as they could accommodate more equipment and more workers, leading to more jobs and more production. Indeed, steel changed the economic landscape and the skyline. But other advances also contributed to the economic boom of the Gilded Age. Refrigeration technology was invented in the mid-1800s, and when combined with railroads, it opened new avenues for the storage and transportation of food products. The invention of the telephone in 1876 revolutionized communication and allowed business to be conducted faster than ever. Then, the invention of the electric light bulb in 1879 increased productivity dramatically by permitting factories and businesses to operate beyond normal daylight hours. Together, the technological advances of the 1800s transformed the American economy. But the rapid growth of the Gilded Age owes to other causes as well. The second is laissez-faire capitalism. During the late 1800s, the government embraced laissez-faire capitalism and other pro-business policies, allowing business leaders to minimize costs and maximize profits. You may remember the term laissez-faire from your world or European history class. Translated from French, the phrase means "let it be." When applied to economics, it refers to a system in which the government keeps its hands off of private corporations, leaving the economy free to respond to market forces like supply and demand. The lack of regulations on business during the Gilded Age gave employers absolute managerial discretion, and it allowed them to scale their businesses at a breakneck pace. Since they didn't have to worry about minimum wages or safety standards, employers could reinvest into land, equipment, and raw materials, allowing them to increase production and compound their profits. Now, we should note here that the United States economy, even during the Gilded Age, was not a pure version of laissez-faire capitalism. The government did have its hands on the economy, but government policies almost always favored businesses rather than workers. For example, tariffs remained in place to protect American manufacturers from foreign competition. And the government offered huge subsidies to railroad companies in the form of land grants and cash payments. But when it came to regulating wages, conditions, and consumer safety, however, the government stayed largely out of the way. But the lack of regulation was not solely to blame for the low wages of the Gilded Age, nor was it solely responsible for the economic growth. Our third cause explains. In addition to laissez-faire economic policy, the growth of corporations during the Gilded Age was aided by a labor surplus in cities. The surplus was brought on by troubles on American farms and an increase in immigration. Okay, so to understand this idea, we need to cover some basic economic principles. You're probably familiar with the concept of supply and demand when it comes to consumer goods. If a desired product is scarce, let's say for example gold, its price is high since it's harder to get. If new gold is discovered, however, the supply increases and the price of gold falls. The more gold there is available, the lower the price will fall and the easier it is to obtain. Now, economists look at labor the same way. In order to create their products, factories need workers. When the supply of available workers is low, employers have to compete for those workers by offering higher wages and better working conditions. However, as the supply of available workers increases, the price of labor falls. During the Gilded Age, there was a labor surplus. In other words, there were more people looking for work than there were jobs available. This meant that employers could offer very low wages and very poor conditions and still keep their factories staffed. One of the reasons for this labor surplus was the difficulty of life on Western farms. Hundreds of thousands of homesteaders had moved to rural areas in the 1860s and 1870s, but realizing the difficulties of life on the plains, many returned to cities to look for work in the 1880s. But the main driver of the urban labor surplus was immigration. During the late 1800s, the United States experienced a massive influx of immigrants, mainly from Southern and Eastern Europe. These new immigrants were generally poorer and less educated than the Western European immigrants of the early 1800s. They came to the United States in search of economic opportunity and were desperate for work when they arrived. Many were farmers in the old country, but without the means to purchase land, most remained in cities and went to work in factories. Of course, because of this constant influx of labor, factory wages were driven lower and lower. This was great for factory owners who were able to cut labor costs and maximize profits, but it was devastating for workers who faced long hours, dangerous conditions, and wages that kept them well below the poverty line. The combination of this labor surplus with the government's commitment to laissez-faire policies did enhance overall economic growth during the Gilded Age. But it also created a widening gap between the rich and the poor, which we'll discuss at length in a later episode. Now, between technological advances, friendly government policies, and the labor surplus, conditions were certainly ripe for industry. But for industry to really take off, it needed a crop of clever and unscrupulous risk takers. This is our final main cause of the Gilded Age. Business empires of the Gilded Age were constructed by talented but ruthless business tycoons who amassed wealth and power by eliminating their competition through innovative business strategies. No discussion of the Gilded Age would be complete without mention of the wealth, power, and fame of the business tycoons of the Industrial Age. Now, during the early 1800s, the most famous and powerful people in the country were political leaders, usually presidents. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Jackson, Lincoln, the list goes on. The same was not true of presidents of the Gilded Age. Let me prove it to you. Here are the Gilded Age presidents. When was the last time you heard James Garfield's name in a casual conversation? How many Grover Cleveland statues have you seen in your life? And what did Chester Arthur even do? I have a master's degree in American history, and I don't have the slightest idea what Chester Arthur did. These American leaders are often referred to as the forgotten presidents. And honestly, there's not much about them we need to remember. But while the name Benjamin Harrison probably doesn't ring any bells, I bet you've heard these: Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt. If you were looking for wealth, fame, and power during the Gilded Age, you didn't find it in the government. You found it at the top of massive monopolistic corporations like Carnegie Steel and Standard Oil. These CEOs built their empires from nothing and were among the most powerful people on the planet. They controlled the American economy because they were responsible for building the American economy. Then they used their economic leverage to influence political leaders in the government. 3 examples explain. Cornelius Vanderbilt's fortune was made in transportation. He built an impressive shipping company before the Civil War, but sold his ships to invest more in railroads in the 1860s and 70s. Vanderbilt was able to acquire competing railroad companies, often by purchasing large quantities of their stocks. By the end of his life, Vanderbilt was one of the wealthiest Americans in history. He also controlled some of the most important supply chains in the entire country, giving him leverage in political spheres. Andrew Carnegie was a self-made steel mogul, an immigrant of Scottish descent who built his empire from nothing. Carnegie pioneered a strategy known as vertical integration in order to maximize his profits and grow his operations. Vertical integration is the process of gaining ownership to every aspect of a business. For example, Carnegie owned the coal and iron ore mines that provided his raw materials. He owned the railroads that transported the raw materials to the mills. And of course, he owned the mills. He then controlled the distribution of his product. By controlling every part of the steel production process, Carnegie eliminated wholesalers and middlemen, reducing his costs and maximizing his profit. When Carnegie sold his steel company in 1900, it controlled a 60% market share of the United States steel industry. Carnegie is widely recognized as the second wealthiest American in history. The only man above him on that list, John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller's business was oil, and his business model relied mainly on a consolidation strategy known as horizontal integration. Horizontal integration is the process of achieving monopoly by eliminating competition, either by pricing them out of business or buying them outright. Rockefeller was a master at both. He created the Standard Oil Trust, a collection of oil companies all under Rockefeller's control. Rather than compete with one another, the branches of Standard Oil coordinated with one another, setting prices together that consumers would be forced to pay. When a rival oil company refused to merge with Standard Oil, Rockefeller simply lowered his prices until the competition was forced out of business. At its peak, Standard Oil controlled 90% of the United States oil production, giving him extraordinary political leverage, in addition to his massive wealth. The financial prowess of Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and others was nothing short of astonishing, but it also raised serious questions about the American economic and political system. While some hailed these tycoons as captains of industry, lauding their roles in building modern America, others saw them as robber barons who built their fortunes on the backs of underpaid and underprotected workers. Their influence in Washington was also criticized. The power of industrial leaders to sway presidents and members of Congress using illicit and corrupt methods called into question the health of American democracy and inspired debates over the role of government in keeping businesses in check. In many ways, the rise of digital technology has plunged us into a second Gilded Age. The internet is changing commerce in ways that mirror the impact of railroads in the 1800s. The newness of digital technology and the lack of government regulation of the industry has allowed for rapid growth and record profits, all the while inspiring serious questions about the ethics of industry practices. And the wealth and power that has been created at the top of tech companies rival the prowess of Carnegie and Rockefeller. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos has been called the wealthiest American in the modern era. And social media giants like Facebook and Twitter are facing increasing scrutiny over their ability to regulate speech on the internet and influence democratic elections. Now, without question, technology has made us safer. It's made us healthier. It's kept us connected, and it's kept us entertained. But the Gilded Age reminds us to keep a watchful eye on the impact of technology on the political and economic institutions that underpin our society. Next time, we'll take a look at the major effects of industrialization during the Gilded Age. See you then.